In the age we are going through today, there is no address for tomorrow. Right now, fear is gripping our minds and we are all locked in our own homes away from social connections and relationships so that we can slow down the spread of the coronavirus. In the meantime, books are becoming a companion to our loneliness and comfort, taking us away from the real world. Meanwhile, books written on other epidemics in the world are also being read well. These books are like diaries of these epidemics and tell how people got out of such epidemics. The British author Daniel Defoe wrote a book, A General of the Plague Year, in 1722, detailing the plague in London in 1665. It is like describing the details of every event of this era, which is very similar to the details of today's coronavirus. This book by Daniel Defoe dates back to 1664, when rumors began to spread and the plague struck the Netherlands. 3 months later, in December 1664, the first suspected plague patient died in London. As the spring season approaches, the number of deaths is on the rise. In the month of July, new rules are imposed on the people, and these rules are exactly the same as they are imposed on us today 400 years later. All pubs, restaurants and events in London were banned at the time. Daniel Defoe writes that the most detrimental thing for the people of London was that many people were careless and wandered the streets. Crowds would gather to buy goods while they were told to stay indoors. By August, the plague had taken a dangerous turn and engulfed entire families, villages and cities. By the end of December, the epidemic had subsided. Things were getting better when the last street and the last neighborhood was cleared of the plague. People came out and thanked God. Like Daniel Defoe, Albert Camus, in his book The Plague, mentions the plague in the Algerian city of Orion, which was devastated by a plague in the 19th century. We can also see today's picture in the details of Camus. At first, the local leaders refused to recognize the disease, even though there were dead rats in the streets of the cities. One of the characters in the book said that the leaders did not know how dangerous rats are for humans. Many books were written on World War II, as well as the Spanish flu. In 1939, British author Catherine Ann Porter wrote about the Spanish flu in her novel Yellow Horse Yellow Rider. When Miranda, the protagonist of the novel, falls ill, her friend Edmund tells her how bad it is, with shops closed, roads closed and streets deserted, and ambulances running on the streets all night. When Miranda recovers, she sees how much the world has changed since World War I and the flu. In a 1963 interview with the Paris Review, Catherine Porter said, "I had a strange change. It took me a long time to get out and mingle with people." 21st century epidemics, such as SARS in 2002 and Ebola in 2014, also affected humans and the economy. Margaret Edwin's 2009 novel, The Year of the Flood, depicts a world in which human beings are more or less extinct after an epidemic. The wind comes like a flood and destroys the city with the wind. Survivors of this epidemic are very lonely. One of the characters in the novel is a dancer named Ren. She survives the epidemic because she gets sick from a client and is kept in solitude. She writes her name over and over again while sitting at home. "If you stay alone for so many days, you forget who you really are," says Ren. The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 also changed the face of the world, killing at least 50 million people worldwide. Just before World War I killed 10 million people. Subsequent events hid the effects of the epidemic. The characters in this novel look back to how the natural and secular balance deteriorated as the ruling companies manipulated nature through bioengineering and how environmentalists opposed these multinationals. The stories of any epidemic are interesting because human beings fight together where the enemy is no human being. In such a world, the difference between good and bad disappears and every character has an equal chance to escape. And in a way the world becomes socialist. Similarly, Emily is the story of St. John Mandel's 2014 novel, Station 11, in which an epidemic breaks out in a country called Georgia, just as a neutron bomb explodes, killing 99% of the world's population. The disease begins when a person playing a character in Shakespeare's play King Lear has a seizure on stage. The next story is 20 years later when the man's wife appears in a place called Station 11. The other surviving characters of Station 11 stage dramas in empty shopping malls and small towns. Aren't people enjoy playing? In many ways, the story of Station 11 is very similar to the famous or infamous Canterbury Tales of the 14th century British poet Chaucer. This was the last story written by Chaucer based on the Black Death or plague that destroyed Europe in the 14th century. Emily St. John Mandel says, "Who will decide what art is or the attitude of a great personality is a culture in itself. When a virus attacks humanity, then how will a new civilization develop? What will change in the art and culture of the past?" There is no doubt that novel characters will be evolving in our time and place, and in the future, how will storytellers describe the epidemic and how to express the spirit of community among human beings? And how to write about the brave people among us? These are the questions that will arise when you and I read and at the same time prepare ourselves for the new world that will emerge after this epidemic.